And like I said, this is very much an evolving piece of work. Myself as the national team is facilitating the calls, but we recognise we could be doing different bits of work to be supporting you with this. So keen to hear your views over the next couple of weeks. So that's very much an introduction for myself. I'm going to hand over to Delia now from Sport England, just to give an overview of where things are at. If that's okay, Delia?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Charlie, and thanks to everyone else who's made the call today. It's really just a quick update from me, and then I'm going to be handing over to David from London Sport and my colleague Dial from the workforce team at Sport England to talk more specifically around the wider workforce piece and links with this agenda. But following the last webinar update, and those of you who might not have been able to attend that, I'll give a brief overview around some of the conversations that we've been having with the National Social Prescribing team at NHS England and some of our plans to collaborate with them over the next few months. And some of you may very well already be aware of some of these plans, but hopefully it could offer a little bit more context around what's being planned at a national level from NHS England and how you might be able to potentially share this information locally or implement some of this within your own planning. But through some of the discussions that we've been having with the social prescribing team at NHS England, we've learned that they're already in the process of developing a learning offer package for those newly recruited link workers, which will be funded through the newly established primary care networks. The first piece is around a core 6-module online learning program for the new link workers. And this is really just going to include information which is much more centered around the core competencies of a link worker. So really the basic things that they need to understand to be able to do their jobs effectively and have the support that they need to do so. So I'm talking about what is social prescribing, what's a link worker, how to understand the wider determinants of health, some bits on active listening techniques, for example. And Sport England will be a part of the feedback group for the content for this program. So we'll be sure to comment and influence the program where we can to ensure that any messaging around sport and physical activity is consistent with our messaging across the sector. And we'll also be developing an additional module to accompany the e-learning program. And hopefully that will allow for more detailed, in-depth support on how link workers can support more people to be physically active. And the timelines for this aren't yet confirmed, as the first of the core modules for the link workers are only now starting to be shared. But we can definitely provide more information on this when the dates and any additional information is really just more firmed up. But the plan is for these to be hosted on Health Education England's website. So it should be accessible to any link worker. So that is including those who are not funded through the primary care networks as well, as long as they have an account with Health Education England. NHS England will also be developing a series of webinars to facilitate the new PCN link worker learning support. And one of the webinars, which has already been scheduled, is around keeping people physically active. And that's due to be delivered on the 27th of November. So you could already pre-register for that if you are a link worker. And again, Sport England will be feeding into that as it takes shape. But it's just important to note that NHS England are coordinating all of these webinars. So we don't have the full details on what that's going to entail just as yet. So just watch this space in that respect. And the final offer as part of the national training package will be face-to-face regional training workshops. And those will be coordinated by the NHS England regional social prescribing coordinators. And they'll take place across each of the 7 English regions around November, December time of this year. And as David will speak about later, we're working with London Sport to implement their training within this to allow for full day training on physical activity. And it will be offered to the primary care network link workers as a priority. But again, they want this to be accessible to any other link worker within these regions if space permits. And there will be a series of face-to-face regional workshops over the next year covering a range of topics like debt management, loneliness. But we're hoping to have physical activity delivered to the newly recruited link workers ahead of the new year. So that's the ambition. But once the dates and the locations for the workshops has been finalized with the NHS England team, we'll be able to share that with the group and the wider network, because there will certainly be opportunities to link with yourselves across the 7 regional events to provide the local knowledge and the tools to support the link workers within your specific geographical area. So that's a bit of a summary in terms of the conversation that we've been having with NHS England. But just before I hand over to David, I just want to quickly highlight two additional pieces which are relevant. The first thing is the We Are Undefeatable campaign. As I'm sure many of you are aware that this is officially launched today, which is really exciting. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the campaign and the work and the support information which has been shared, and we've already set into the campaign at a number of different stages, so I'm not going to say too much about it now. But I just wanted to flag that there's some really good tools and resources to come out of the campaign, which can also be used to support the wider social prescribing agenda. So you may be familiar with the work that UK Coaching has done, and I know that a number of active partnerships have fed into this around the guidance and resource for those that both deliver sport and physical activity and also those who employ or support the workforce in doing so. So I definitely recommend having a look at this, which is on the Undefeatable website, in addition to the We Are Undefeatable website itself, if you haven't already done so. Because I know initially in the first few conversations that we've had across the webinar and from some of the conversations that I've been having, there has been some concern around whether there was that support to ensure that the workforce is ready to receive referrals through social prescribing schemes for those who have long-term conditions. So hopefully the campaign information can be shared in addition to any existing resources like Moving Medicine and others with partners to help facilitate that. And the final piece is just around what the local government association is. They have a call for best practice around social prescribing. You might have seen this already, but they are starting a program around social prescribing, specifically looking at how councils can use their culture and sport facilities, so leisure centres, parks, libraries, to deliver health outcomes. And we know that social prescribing obviously plays a really key role in that. And so you may have seen that they've put a call out for best practice. So if you or any other partners that you've worked with have any ideas around best practice that you're aware of, it would be really great to share any good learning really for how councils have engaged with these services to deliver social prescription. And I believe that the intended audience is for local authority officers and councillors. So if that helps to shape any examples you might have, I'm pulling together some of the work. So if you have a few lines or even some case studies that you might be able to share, then please do send them through to me and I can collate and share this with the LGA. But those are the two big updates for me. So I'm going to just quickly hand over to David from London Sport to just talk more about the work that they've been doing in London.
Okay, so can I just interrupt you there? Sorry, thank you, Delia.
Yeah,
I think that's been really, really useful. Can I just open the floor before we go into the detail of the work David's been doing with yourself as well? Can I just pause and ask if anyone's got any questions on the call? Either use your chat box or unmute yourself if you wanted to ask Delia anything.
Charlie, it's Sophie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sophie.
I was just wondering whether the pace can be slowed down slightly. Certainly me, I'm not as familiar with this area of work as some might be, so trying to get some of that detail down was pretty tough. So if we could just slow the pace a bit, that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. We're recording it,
Sorry,
and I've made a few notes as well. That's absolutely fine. I know it's a lot of content there, so yeah, hopefully through those mechanisms, you can make sure you've got all the information covered.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions for Delia? I mean, it's fantastic you're on the call. Thank you, Delia.
Right.
Hi, it's James from Yorkshire Sport.
Hi, James.
Hiya, just a quick one in terms of you mentioned the kind of 7 regional events and the links in with both NHS England and Health Education England. Will their channels go directly to the primary care networks in terms of promoting the training and the modules? How will it work in terms of that side of the communication? Do you know?
Yeah, so I think the ambition is for the newly recruited regional coordinators to help facilitate that. So from what I understand, they'll be drawing together all of the link workers within those 7 regions to ensure that they have the understanding that these regional workshops will be going ahead. So I believe it's under the regional coordinators who will be facilitating all of that.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then are you able to share their details as soon as they're in post? So then we can obviously be part of that conversation.
I don't have access to that as of yet, but I can certainly put the call out to NHS England to see how they're sharing that information, because I think it would be valuable irrespective of the regional training, so that those regional coordinators are sort of accessible and can be contacted. So I can definitely follow up and see. I think a number of them are in post, but I'm not too sure the extent to which all of them are, and if they have any plans for how they're going to be sharing not only the information around the regional coordinators, but where the primary care networks are geographically as well. So I can definitely try and pick out a little bit more information and share that.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you, Delia.
Anything else for Delia? Oh, sorry, yep, who was that, sorry?
It's Emily from Energize Me.
Hi.
My question is about the online training, and then obviously the access to these face-to-face regional events. If we're talking to PCNs that are using a voluntary services to run their social prescription, are they going to get access to this? Is there going to be costs involved for them because they're not employed through the NHS?
No, that's a good question. No, so from my understanding, and because the funding is being trickled down through the primary care network, it doesn't matter whether the link worker sits within the GP practice or within the voluntary sector, they would still have access to the training.
Okay, wonderful.
I think it's an important question, because they do want to make all of the training material accessible, so the online training, the webinars, and I think to some extent which they can be able to do, the regional training offers accessible to those who aren't funded through the primary care networks as well.
Perfect.
Any other questions before we hand over to David? I mean, Delia is a fantastic resource on the line, and obviously has done a lot of scoping her end. Okay. What I'll do, you might be digesting what Delia's been saying, so I'll hand over to David. And David's been doing some great pilot work at London Sport, and he's going to talk through some of the key findings of the impact report and expand a bit on the training resource that Delia referenced. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Delia. Hi, everybody. I'll start mainly with a little bit of background information. So about 12 months ago, in a bid to contribute towards our work around inactivity in London, we decided to think about whether we could work with a workforce outside of the sector, and that led us to working with social prescribers. And what we wanted to do is to see whether we could have an impact upon the two things, upon their skills and knowledge around sport and physical activity, but also whether we could increase their confidence around sport and physical activity as well. So we commenced a pilot study working with 3 social prescribing programs in London. We actually canvassed all the programs, but we chose 3. And we deliberately chose 3 that incorporated both staff and volunteers, so we could get learnings from both those aspects. Shortly after that, we then commissioned a training partner to help us do this, and we actually got an agreement with the University of Kent to work with us on this pilot project. And so together with the University of Kent, we've been developing this new training resource. We then set about creating the resource, co-creating it with the social prescribers themselves and the program managers. And we put together a 1-day training package with a half-day follow-up session. And we ran those training sessions throughout sort of this year and a little bit last year. At the same time, I was also keen to capture impact and learnings from that. So we also commissioned a separate management evaluation report to see exactly what impact we would have upon staff. I have to say on this, the project really was about workforce. I think we've acknowledged that there are lots of other things we could have measured or taken account of because of that client, that patient journey. But we would, on this project, we were particularly focused on the workforce and whether we could have an impact upon them. So fast forward to the end of the project, which is where we are now because we've completed it. And what we have learned is that, in terms of the impact report, is that we did have an impact upon both the skills and the knowledge of the social prescribers over that period. And we also had an impact upon their confidence as well. So it was positive we could do that. At the same time, it was a pilot project, and we now want to roll out the programme across London and also build upon that knowledge and that insight as well. And I think that's led us now to the position where, A, we want to roll out the programme across London to the rest of the social prescribing network. And secondly, we've now obviously joined with Sport England and had discussions with them about how this could potentially be used with the work that Dealey is doing with the new link workers, but also how it could also be potentially used through NILE, through the active partnerships as well, and how that can be scaled up. So that's where we are at the moment in terms of really we're looking at the practical logistics of scaling the training up. Because obviously we're not a training provider per se, and we have to think about how that can be worked, but also how that works in practice, and also the timescales around that as well. The training is competency based. The University of Kent used behaviour change competency frameworks to develop what they were doing, which was really important, and it's been changed and amended as we've gone along, as we've learned things. But equally important as well, us as the active partnership, we had to make sure that what we contribute to the programme, and we are involved in the delivery of it, is really important as well. So we have to make sure, or have to ensure that the local providers of activities, whoever that may be, with the local authority, private providers, voluntary sector, are also involved in the training as well. So there's a real connection with the theory of how you get somebody to be more physically active, but equally there's also an insight into the practical knowledge and the practical steps that need to be taken in that local area. So we've had to play a role in that as well. More recently, excuse me, more recently we've trained up some new tutors to deliver the course, because we're conscious of, we just had a small, just had the University of Kent delivering the pilot, but now we've gone on to training up a few more tutors so that they can go on and deliver the course for us across London. And I should add into that as well, Coventry, Solihull, West Midlands, Think Active have also been involved with us in that phase as well. So they're actually looking to deliver the programme within the geographical area as well. And so in the next few weeks, we hope to sort of confirm with Sport England how we can scale it up, and how, if people want to take advantage of it, how they can do that as well.
Great, thank you very much, David. Can I just check? And you know, I'm not hugely close to this agenda. So the one-day training, that's the training you mentioned as being part of the link worker workshops. Is that right, Delia?
Yep, that's exactly right. So the plan is to have a one-day training through the regional workshops with NHS England, and this is the same training that David was just referring to.
Brilliant. So then in Think Active CSW, Abby, you're then looking at, so because obviously there's people taking on link worker roles who are already in post or not part of that new 1,000. So you're looking at rolling out this training to existing social prescribing link workers, is that right?
Yeah, so some of the existing social prescribing link workers, but also we're going to have a look at other workforces that are out there that are kind of working with patients or social care clients, so perhaps domiciliary care workers or dementia navigators.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense.
In addition to the social prescribing link workers and social prescribing workforce that are already there.
Okay, and that'll be really interesting, I believe, to those on the call as well. So it's it can be used in a much broader sense than those 1,000 link workers.
Charlie, just adding into that, and to Abby's point as well, because we did discuss this when we met recently about it. We're the same as well. We don't see this as being exclusive to social prescribers, and in fact, we're having discussions with physiotherapist providers, with occupational therapists. So there's lots of other workforces that potentially could benefit from this. So even though we're talking about social prescribing, we don't think the training is specifically unique to them, but it can be applied to other workforces as well. Really, any workforce that is coming into contact with inactive people.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. That's great. Before I open the floor to questions, David, is there anything else you wanted to add?
If you want to go to our website, the impact report and some of the findings are on there. So if you want to do any more reading after this, it's on our website, so you can have a look there if you want to.
Thanks, David. And sorry, before we open up the floor, Delia or Niall, we've also got Niall Judge on the line. I'm sure lots of you know him as sort of the workforce lead at Sport England as well. So if there's any questions for Niall or Delia or David, but before we do that, did you want to just give any viewpoint from a workforce perspective, Niall?
Yeah, happy to. I like that you kind of dropped me in there. That most of you know that. I know Niall. I was like, oh God, either a good or a bad. Yeah. So I guess the only thing from me, from a workforce perspective, it is just this kind of reassurance that we are thinking broader. We are thinking, through some of the projects that we're funding through the innovation, we are looking to take learnings from a wider base as well. So obviously the link work, this particular course, as people have said, it works for audiences, it works for people who are in the sort of maybe in the health system or looking at that support system. But the other great thing about something like Think Actives project, the innovation project, is around looking at the community activation. So we're very conscious as well from a workforce team is make sure that we're exploring that broader role of social prescribing in terms of the community activation, in terms of what is it that community clubs or community groups really could look like in order to support them. And actually, as we get through some of these innovation projects, we take learning from Think Active, we take learning from WASP's project around sort of accreditation for community activity, then that will really help to build a really good, strong picture that can be shared across the network around different ways of doing stuff. And separate to this, I'll send I'll send some updates on those innovation projects as we get them through. But I guess it's just a kind of reassurance that there's a bigger thing. It's not just a one trick. Let's look at this course to hit link workers, and we hope the rest of the sector will kind of sort itself out. And I think if you look at some of the language that UK Coach have put out today, along with the We Are Undefeatable campaign around the workforce, I think that kind of language is really useful. And I think it's more things like that we're going to kind of see going forward. Obviously, like David said, we're committing to kind of work with David on how we roll this out and who we do. I would say just please be patient. We will get to that point where we will be able to support this at more of a local level. But we need to just make sure we get the model right and appropriate for all of you guys. I think very shortly, I don't know if I'll do it or Delia will do it, about what you could do in the meantime as active partnerships, but I'll park that in case Delia wants to cover that, or I can cover it, just in terms of how can you make sure that this course is ready to be landed locally as well, when and if that time comes.
Okay, that was perfect. Thank you very much, Niall. I think being seen, especially from a workforce angle, in a much broader perspective, especially linking to some of the audiences that David and Abby spoke about. So thank you very much. I'll open up the floor to questions then from those on the call. So either please direct your call to Delia, David or Niall, if that's okay. I'll just give it a moment longer. Sometimes people get worried they're going to speak over others. Longer. Robin's asked David if you could send a link through to the impact report. I think it's on the website, but what I will do, Robin, is include a link in the minutes that I'm taking. Any other questions for Delia, Niall, or David? Okay, you obviously did a great job, you three, so thank you very much. to then is move on to Abby at Think Active CSW. And as Niall said, they'd had some innovation funding around social prescribing. So I thought it might be useful for Abby to give a bit of an update as to where they've got to and share some of the emerging learning. So over to you, Abby.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. I've also got Hayley here with me today, who's been doing a lot of the on the ground work on this project that we've been working on. So Hayley might chip in as well, if that's all right. So our project that we have innovation funding has three main elements to it. So the first element is the stuff that we've already talked around about upskilling the social prescribers and other kind of health and social care staff with regards to being able to advocate and promote and signpost effectively and have conversations around physical activity. The second element, which Niall alluded to, is around what we can do to support existing community sport and physical activity provision that's already out there, to make sure that it's being provided in a way that that patients and participants feel comfortable and confident to access it, and that community sport provision feels comfortable and confident to be able to promote itself to and receive patients or people being signposted to it through by link workers and other health and social care professionals. And then the third element is to build kind of confidence and trust between that provision and between that health and social care workforce. So there's obviously lots of work going on at the moment with regards to the recruitment of the social prescribing workforce and also the training that we spoke about. So we've chosen to focus at the moment on getting that community provision kind of ready to be able to receive referrals, because we're very conscious that we didn't want to go and train health and social care professionals until we knew, or we were confident that there were kind of welcoming places that they could actually be referring patients to. So we have been going through a process where we've identified some priority areas where we've started to map and identify community sport and physical activity provision, which are up for the challenge of kind of working to make sure that they are providing that kind of customer-centred, welcoming environment that welcomes new patients. So we've enlisted the help of some of our local authority sports development officers with this, and we've identified a checklist that we work through with each organisation that we've identified to work with, that just ask them to get them to think about some key things or some of the key barriers that maybe people face when they are accessing community provision for the first time. So it asks some questions around, have they thought about how they market their activity? We provide them with resources and templates and tools to get them to think about how they market their activity. We get them to think about the information that they're providing. So are they providing enough information to break down some of the barriers that people might face? So where do people park? What do they have to wear? Who do they contact? What happens when they go along to a session for the first time? Who do they need to ask for? All the things that are just things that might prevent somebody from going along to something for the first time. Because locally for us, mental health and also dementia are kind of local priorities in terms of our demographic. We're also asking clubs and groups to think about considering what they can do to become more confident specifically around dementia and mental health. And we're linking in with Get Set to Go, which Hayley, who is working on this project, is also the Get Set to Go coordinator. So it all links quite nicely together. So the position that we're in at the moment is that probably across our area, we're probably working with about 30 different clubs and organisations. We've tried to get together a cross-section of different organisations, from kind of traditional sports clubs through to more informal community type provision, just to try and test which organisations and clubs and groups respond best to this approach. So we're in the process of kind of working with the groups and clubs so that by the time we've done the work to train the social prescribing link workers, we're able to match them up quite quickly. I don't know I don't know whether there's anything else, if there's any questions on that at this point.
No, I think you're okay to carry on, Abby. That's been really helpful. So, actually, so Sophie on the line, and to confirm, Kay, it's Abby from CSW. They were previously CSW, so they had a. Okay, over to you, Sophie.
It's Emily.
It's Emily, but we're together. My question, I guess, what I've come across when talking to social prescribers, so when they're mapping activities and when we're helping them map local offers to what their uptake is. I don't know whether you have come across that.
We haven't come across any social prescribers that have specifically said that activity needs to be free. We've come across issues where individuals have not necessarily been able to afford to commit to going along to physical activity, and we're piloting with one of our social prescribers a hardship fund, just to try and kind of bridge the gap between somebody who may be interested or want to take part in something but hasn't necessarily got the resource to be able to fund it in the short term. But we have been very clear that actually, in terms of the activities that people are signposted to, in terms of sustainability, they do need to be able to kind of really realistically be able to kind of afford to be able to continue the activity on a long-term basis, which was why we've tried to get a really a big cross section of different types of organisations that we're working with. So where things maybe don't cost as much as maybe other activities. And the other thing that we've been talking to the clubs and groups about is different ways of presenting their offer. So maybe rather than having to have an upfront year-long membership, is there a way that they can offer pay and play, or can people play in smaller chunks for activity, or offering a discount for new members, or free sessions for people to come and try or do a taster of activity?
Perfect. Thank you very much for that.
Are there any more questions for Abby and Hayley at this stage from anyone? Okay. Abby, did you want to continue?
No, the only other thing I was going to add is that there's some guidance that's been produced for social prescribers on kind of the types of questions or information that they need to gather from kind of voluntary sector or small organisations. So when we've been working through our checklist with the clubs, we've included those criteria in that checklist. So again, rather than the social prescribers having to kind of go in and do the work to collect that information about the kind of the club or the group, we've kind of preempted that and got the group and club kind of ready to be able to answer those questions for the social prescriber, just to try and really make it easy for the social prescriber to quite quickly start making referrals to sport and physical activity in the community.
Great. And are those questions working effectively?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've just basically incorporated it onto our checklist, which we're happy to share the checklist that we're using. And we're refining it as we go along, because what we've found, and especially having the local authorities working with us, that's been really useful in terms of refining the types of questions and the things that we're getting groups and clubs to think about.
Okay, no, that's really useful. If you're happy to share the checklist, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, we're happy to share it. So it's basically, it helps frame the conversation that we have with the club. So it's got questions we ask them, and then prompts for the type of kind of information that we're looking for. And then our plan is to, for each group or club that we're working with, is to take the key information from that checklist and produce a bit of an overview for each club or group that a social prescriber can use to quickly kind of like look at and use with a patient to discuss the club, so they can start talking about where the club is, where you park, what you need to take, who you need to contact, a link to a short video that shows maybe the customer journey in terms of when they go along to the club for the first time, just to help facilitate that conversation. Because part of what we want to achieve is, rather than a social prescriber having a database of activities where they kind of type in a club and type in a sport and they pop out and churn out with a couple of options, that actually the social prescriber can talk in detail about specific clubs and groups and activities, again, just to help break down those barriers, because it's a big step for somebody just to be issued with a phone number to follow it up themselves. Whereas if the social prescriber has got more information about how somebody takes part, they've possibly been along and had a look and met some of the people that run the group, and they can talk really passionately and informatively about the opportunity, then the aim is that actually somebody will just feel a lot more confident to be able to go along for the first time, because they're just armed with a lot more information.
That sounds great. I think it would save reinventing the wheel, so that would be great if we could circulate that with the notes. Abby, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly add in as well, just to Abby's point there, which is a really good point. And we try to do that in an aspect of the training course as well. So really important that the accessions are and the activities that are recommended, there's some element of personality there, so they can see the person that's going to do it, or they have that connection, rather than it just being, this is a session that's on at this time.
And that is absolutely true. And there is a little bit of resistance from some social prescribers who feel nervous about actually recommending an activity as opposed to just signposting. But I think in terms of breaking down the barriers that people face, having as much information and the social prescriber really understanding and knowing what's on offer is really helpful in that respect.
Definitely,
yeah,
and that's the kind of
our research found as well.
Yeah, and that's the kind of point of today's call, is to share some of that learning that's starting to come through. So yeah, I'd suggest if any of you want to pick it up in more detail with Abby or David, in terms of any specifics, and please, I believe they're both happy to have chats with different active partnerships, and obviously they'll keep you updated on progress as well. Is there any questions for Abby before we open the floor in terms of wider projects? Okay, Delia, Niall, David or Abby, is there anything else you'd like to add before we open it up?
The only bit that would be really interesting from my perspective, to kind of get probably other people's feedback, is that we're really struggling in terms of how to monitor and evaluate this, and particularly in terms of tracking patients, because the social prescribing, how social prescribers and in terms of how social prescribers are kind of monitoring and evaluating, and the data that they're being asked to collect anyway, trying to embed collection of physical activity data, and then how to track a patient through the journey from a social prescriber through to a community club, and then to monitor their ongoing participation. We're really struggling with how to actually go about doing that.
Delia, is there anything there being worked at a national level?
Unfortunately not. I think it's a challenge that's going to be seen across the board in terms of the wider outcomes reporting across social prescribing in general. But I do think it's a valid point, because I think that there is a challenge given the complexity and the difference between different schemes and how they collect and monitor data over time. So I don't think that there's a consistent way that it's been approached, or nor is there a way to really provide support for how to embed that monitoring and evaluation process within it. But I do think that that's something that the national team have recognized. I'm not saying from a sport and physical activity perspective as it is, but I think it is something that they've had a lot of feedback from in terms of how this agenda is being implemented, and there is a recognition that the outcomes piece needs to be thought through so that we could actually start to really see the benefit of sport and physical activity especially. So I don't think that there is a very clear thought on that at the moment, but hopefully that'll be something that we will start to see over the next few months, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just on that, Delia, is there an opportunity there, say, for the likes of Abby, who are sort of exploring this as we speak? Obviously, you're the conduit between ourselves as a network and NHS England at the moment on this. I mean, do you think there'd be scope where they could look to support Abby with this a bit further to try and unpick some of that?
I think it's definitely something that we could raise, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had anyway, because we're hearing it from a number of other partners as well. So Abby, definitely we can pick it up and see how we might be able to work forward on that.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful.
Has any other active partnerships on the call had any experience of sort of the M&E of social prescribing? Any good practice they could share?
Hi, it's James from Yorkshire Sport.
Hi, James.
We've done little bits through a range of different things. We did some stuff through Creating Connections, which was a kind of it was social prescribing really. It was recommendation mainly aimed at people with a disability into sport and physical activity. And as a very simple method in terms of a metric, we use the short single item measure in terms of the question around on how many days in the past week have you been active for more than 30 minutes, and then so you get a score of 0 to 7, and we use that as kind of a qualifying question to target the inactive people, but then also as a for a baseline, and then 3, 6, and 12-month follow-ups to see hopefully that would increase throughout the time. Through another scheme we've been involved in Kirklees, we've also been looking at how we use in terms of the wider outcomes, just away from the metrics of the physical activity. We've looked at something called Most Significant Change, which was through a partner organisation, but it was a lot more around the questioning and the interviews and the stories really from the individual around how they've made a most significant change or whatever it might be that's come out of it, which isn't always physical activity by any stretch. It's a lot of the time it's just to do with getting by from day to day and leaving the house and all those kind of things, certainly with some of the more complex cases, but a range of different things that we've kind of tried out via ourselves or via partners. So happy to share if anyone wants to give me a call about it.
Thanks, James. I think that's really useful to hear, especially the fact that you've rolled them out in 2 different projects, and sort of like you say, one's more about the case studies, wider outcomes, and one's sort of obviously more KPI driven. Is that helpful, Abby?
Yeah, I mean, that is really helpful. And it's interesting you mentioned the single metric measure, because I think the issue that we have, as far as I understand it, is in the monitoring and evaluation or the performance management framework that's been set for social prescribing link workers, there isn't a specific measure around physical activity, which means that we will need to try and encourage or advocate for a physical activity measure to be incorporated on top of the national guidelines around performance measurement for those social prescribing link workers. And I suppose that's where it becomes complex, because each of the social prescribing link workers may be or each PCN might have a different approach in terms of the recruitment of their link workers. It's quite difficult to advocate that right across for us, Coventry, Solihull, Warwickshire, and then be able to access that data as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a challenge. We had a bit more control and a bit more influence, I suppose, with the ones we were doing. So yeah, it would be a challenge with that.
Okay. Right. What I'd like to do is, obviously we've got some new names on the call, which is fantastic. Social prescribing, your word is spreading. I tasked each of you with just highlighting any new information to share and any key learning. So I'm really interested to hear from some of the active partnerships on the call who haven't been involved previously, just to give a bit of a snapshot of the work going on in your area. Just to try and help share that learning. So, James, I know you've just spoken. Are you okay to give a bit of a brief overview of the work going on in Yorkshire?
Yeah, fine. We're doing a kind of a range of different things. Our geography is South Yorkshire. They worked quite well together already, and there was quite a lot of structure and quite a lot of capacity within some of the workforce already existing within local authority through something called kind of connect. It's like a connecting service essentially. So what they decided to do was there was a proposal put in from the local authority to the CCG to essentially make all those existing people link workers, to then free up the money that goes directly to the primary care networks, which is 9 times, I think it's around 35 grand, isn't it? So to free up that money to then be utilised by the local authority to support the voluntary community sector in terms of capacity building and being able to be in a better position to accept people in terms of where the support goes for when the people get prescribed into the activity essentially. So services for kind of years, this is kind of coming and it's kind of thrown it off kilter a little bit in terms of duplication and other things. So that was one example. Another has just been real specific work in Bradford. With one of the primary care loneliness and isolation. And not just through the link work because the links with the voluntary community sector, conversation with the advanced nurse practitioners, extra time, so for adults, so increased to 15 minutes, they're keen to put in something around being more active. And that might be for 5 minutes down the road, but they're really keen, linked into the physios and the nurse teams to make sure there's some of that kind of ongoing activity. So just a couple of examples of where we've been having some discussions really.
Okay, thanks, James. And in terms of your active partnerships role, are you sort of involved at that sort of strategic senior level in terms of trying to influence the social prescribing agenda, or is it more sort of a hands-on work within those localities?
Difference between the two. We've had a history of we've been a partner in a social prescribing scheme for the past 4 years. We've done some other different
That's really interesting. Thanks, James. Thanks for sharing that. I think if anyone wants to unpick some of the work going on in Yorkshire a bit more, please feel free to pick up the phone to James. Any questions to James before I pick on someone else? Okay. Anthony, you'll probably kill me for doing this. Are you able to give just a brief overview of the work going on in Active Sussex and your involvement as an active partnership, please?
Yeah, cheers, Charlie. Well, it'll be very brief. This is an area that we're just starting to get a bit of an understanding on in Sussex. So just in terms of how Sussex is set up, it's made up of East Sussex, West Sussex and Brighton and Hove. So you've got 2 county councils and 1 unitary authority. And just through some of the investigative work that we're doing in those areas, it's obviously something that we're just keen to understand a bit more about. On and trying to just understand it a bit more.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. And in terms of the call today from a work where you can pick up conversations?
I'll be honest, I've not really come at it from a workforce perspective. I've looked at it from the view of trying to get some understanding as to how that might relate to what goes on in Sussex. I think from our point of view, the main thing is because each area is, going across the country, every area is very different, and even within our own county, the difference between East Sussex, Brighton and Hove and West Sussex is so different. And our main thing is just getting out and about, talking to people, understanding who's doing what social prescribing where, which we're getting a bit more of a grip on. And then at that point, once we've built those relationships up, I'm looking at it much from a co-design point of view, so making sure physical activity is part of their agenda within those areas, of which there may be workforce that comes out of it, but I'm not specifically looked at it from that point of view.
No, that makes sense. So at the moment, like you say, still very much a scoping. And I think what's become apparent as these webinars have progressed is how different, the different localities can be and how they're setting up and operating social prescribing programs and the support to those, the workforce working on it. So, no, very much so. Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. Steve Brewster, can I pick your brains on how things are going around this agenda in your locality, please? Steve, are you there? It's going to keep themselves on mute and not get picked up. Okay, I'll go to Chris Cork. Chris, are you there? Are you able to give a bit of a view? That's bizarre. Okay.
Must be something funny going on in Worcestershire.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's very bizarre. Okay, well, I'm conscious. I don't really like. Is there anything you wanted to share your practice or any learning on the call?
Charlie, I'm happy to jump in at this point, just from a logistic perspective.
Yeah, great.
Just upon that, just why people, because I think a couple of people obviously are just listening. Delia, do you want me to just go through what we discussed earlier?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Mal.
Yeah, cool. So I think the most interesting thing for me is what a lot of people have said today, both from Yorkshire's examples, from Think Active examples, and the work that Anthony's doing down in Sussex, is very much the positioning of whereabouts you are with different bits and pieces. So I appreciate that the big thing at the moment is the potential for this course, the excellent course that London Sport have developed. And what I would say is the course is very much one part of the tool here. And I've kind of, there's 4 things I've kind of got in mind, or we had in mind in terms of takeaways, to ensure that when that course is ready, you know at the point that you're going to be ready as a partnership for it. So I think the 4 kind of things we've got is having those kind of strategic discussions at sort of senior levels with your health partners, to get that buy-in, to get that kind of commitment, to be aware of the landscape. And I think Anthony, illustrated that quite well in terms of just knowing what's out there, what's the pathways that people typically take at the moment, or the referral ways of going. I think that's, being aware of that landscape will help you an awful lot, because that will then help make the course as kind of applicable as possible. To an extent, if you can, it's that connection to the link workers, not necessarily knowing them, by name or meeting them, but at least starting to build some trust, build some rapport, showing that, what your role is in it as an active partnership, in how they can help them. And the last thing is really local places where referral happens or could happen around physical and looking at the value. So the more that you're aware of all of that landscape and who's doing what, where, when, and what could support, all of those things, all of these 4 things will come together to kind of say, we're kind of ready to do this course now. And I think that for me was really the takeaway from today, and the thing to kind of keep you thinking and keep you busy over the next, whilst you wait for the course to kind of move forward, is to make sure you are in the right position for the course to be landed, and so that you've got that strategic buy-in, you've got the real trust and engagement from link workers and local providers. And that's honestly the things to kind of go away and consider. And it's not to say that you need that all by next month. Actually, I think Anthony's saying about how long it's taking to do bits and pieces is a real reflection of it. This will take time, if you're at the start of your journey, or if you're very much right at the point of wanting to do something. Starting to illustrate that now will be really useful when we come around to looking at how the course rolls out and where it rolls out to. So that's kind of just, I had those 4 things down there, but miraculously they came up in all of the examples that have been given there from David, from Anthony, from Abby, and from James. So yeah, they're the kind of just 4 key things I would consider and keep considering as you're moving forward.
And I might just add something to that. Thanks, Niall. Sorry, Delia as well. You might come through those local discussions and the conversations that you're having at a local level, you might recognize that the training might not be a priority within your local area. But I think what's important to recognize is that whilst we can share information around what's happening around NHS England and their plans, this is a entirely local agenda. So it's really important, I think, from our perspective, to really understand how it is landing and how it is being embedded. Because I think a good opportunity, like we discussed earlier, around some of the challenges around monitoring and evaluation, is if we have an opportunity to sort of feed that back through some of the channels that we've established with NHS England, through the Social Prescribing Academy and others, to sort of highlight that there are still challenges and how this agenda is landing. And
thank you, Delia. I'm not sure if you cut out then towards the end. Are you still there? Oh, is that Delia back in? Okay, not sure what's happened there. Yeah, I think both Delia and Niall make some fantastic points there for us all to go away and consider. Before we start to look to wrap up, is there anything else as a follow-up to Niall and Delia's comments that anyone would like to add to? Okay, what I will do is I'll draw you on to sort of the final stages. I'm very conscious. I think this webinar to me has shown more than ever each active partnership is at a different at a different stage with social prescribing, whether it's the initial scoping, whether it started to have those discussions, or whether it's, a project has been underway. For example, the London Sport model, where they're looking at rolling out the training, or the Think Active, where we can look to learn from. What I'm really aware of is that we make the support from the national team and Sport England as useful as possible to all active partnerships. And I think the webinars have served a function up to a point, but I'm just conscious we need to maybe start to tailor what these webinars look like, or whether it needs to be a face-to-face meeting to share some of the good practice. Has anyone got any initial thoughts on that on the call? Any reflections on how useful you found today's call in terms of a format and the content?
Hi Charlie, it's James.
Thanks, Dave.
I really like the kind of the webinar approach. It's really helpful just to be able to kind of sit in the office and have the conversation. Face to face might be a bit harder, obviously, depending on people's kind of flexibility and stuff. But as a starting point, I think the webinar is really useful, and especially with it being recorded, I can then send it around the team as well afterwards with some of the content. So, for example, with Michelle, who's our workforce lead and what have you. So, yeah, really good.
Okay, thank you, James. Is there anything you would change? So we've obviously had a workforce theme, excuse me, to this webinar. Are we getting a sense that theming each webinar is better than having an open forum?
Charlie, it's Abby. Do you mean like a face-to-face thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, no, I think in terms of, so the previous two webinars we just had Let's Talk About Social Prescribing, and this webinar very much focused more on the workforce angle. So I don't know whether we want to keep continuing, because social prescribing is such a huge agenda. Do we look to keep focusing the purposes of these calls on one particular angle, for example, the workforce, or do we go back to broadening it? I'd welcome everyone's views on that.
Charlie, can I chime in there? Oh.
Go on.
It's Delia. Sorry, everyone, that I cut out. Our service is notoriously horrible in the lower ground floor here at Sport England's offices. I think that there's a lot of value in sort of joining up the conversation. I think that I appreciate that the workforce piece is a really significant part of it, but I think there's a lot of value in seeing how it connects to other work around social prescribing as well. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks, Delia. Would others agree? I'm going to take that as a yes. I mean, from our perspective, I think we need to find a way to make these calls a bit more interactive. So obviously we've teed up Delia and Niall and David and Abby. And I think what I would be asking from active partnerships is to maybe volunteer themselves to give a bit of an overview in future webinars, just so that we're effectively sharing the learning and good practice. So I'll get my thinking cap on about how best we can do that for the next webinar, but it sounds like there is interest in doing a next webinar. So perhaps I'll keep it up to date with Delia, David and Niall in regards to the training, and look to organise a webinar sort of maybe early November, late October, early November, as a bit of a check-in and see how everyone's getting on. Does that sound agreeable with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Charlie,
yep. Hi, Sophie.
Sorry, just because there was 2 of us here, we were just chatting through behind the scenes, and absolutely there's value in webinars for the time saving and the efficiency point of view. But the other thing that we were saying is that there is additional added value in coming together sometimes, because you get more detail and depth and more, I guess, the richness of the learning on that peer-to-peer, face-to-face you can't necessarily replicate over a webinar. So I think intersperse the webinars with an opportunity, but granted, it might not necessarily be at a national level. We might have to do it at a more regional or north-south level, just to give people the opportunity to have some of that face-to-face conversation. And the other thing that we also reflected on is the fact that, and I know I'm probably a bit biased here with a workforce hat on, is that I can't imagine any of the conversations not having some workforce element attached to them, because you know, the workforce is required to have that first initial point of contact with the individual patient, and a workforce is required to deliver whatever it is that they're being socially prescribed towards. So, you know, I would still see that ongoing value in keeping the workforce agenda as a high-end priority topic of this conversation.
Yeah, I think both points are really valid, and your face-to-face comment is also being backed up by Steve. Steve Brewster, who's on the call. His microphone's not working, but he's in the chat to me. And I think this is my gut feeling. I feel that the webinars, like you say, have a feeling of how useful they can be. I think when it's a more established piece, because it's an emerging area with lots of, you know, new learning. Yeah, sorry, is that Niall or Steve?
It's David, sorry.
Oh, sorry, David. Hi, David.
Hi. Just to chip in there, really, which is, yeah, I mean, I think webinars take you so far, and they're really useful for sort of a quick hour catch-up, things like that. But I think what we found is that certainly when colleagues from Coventry, Solihull and West Midlands came down to our tutor training, and we had tutors in the room, and we had an agenda, but it was the real opportunity to get into the detail, and it's often the subtleties and the detail of it where the learning can be the greatest, because in theory, until you break down the theory, it's about the practice of it, where you have to really spend some time discussing and looking at where you start to unpeel the skin of it, really.
Yeah, I'd agree, and that's kind of where I'm feeling. I feel these are good as sort of stopgaps, but I feel we've got to get a bit more depth behind it now, and share that learning to a greater extent. Delia and Niall, is that something I can pick up with you offline?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, happy to pick up with me offline from a workforce perspective.
Yeah.
Like I said, from workforce, we've kind of committed to say we are going to do an event this year, and I'm literally just finalising the date for that. And it looks like the morning of that event will be very much about learning, sharing, and kind of talking about some of the meaty stuff that have come out of workforce plans and from the September updates. So this could very much fall into a first opportunity to have a small discussion with people around the table.
Great.
Considering there's a deal of interest. As for the broader, I think that's more, well, it'll come into the workforce bit, but perhaps something a bit broader.
I think that's Thank you very much for everyone for dialing into the call. A special thanks, obviously, to David, Abby, Niall and Delia on the call. Fantastic to get your input into sharing good practice and some case studies. I will send the notes and the link to the recording next week, probably be next Tuesday, which you can then forward on with your colleagues. And I'll continue to liaise with Delia and Niall sort of on those national discussions. But thank you again all for your input, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie.
Cheers. See ya.